Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today. I have a good friend and colleague, Dr. Jessie Duppler here. Hi, Jessie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I am so excited that you're here with me today. So, if anyone's tuning in that has been waiting for content on cycling, Jessie is my guru. She is my go-to. I recently, if anyone's tuning in for the first time, have been talking more about my triathlon training. I have been a fused athlete my whole life, and I basically taught myself how to train myself for a triathlon. And I've had tons of people reach out wanting, having specific questions about cycling and bike fit. And I was like, this is out of my depth. But I have a friend that can definitely help me through this. So, just really briefly, in case this is your first time seeing her, Dr. Jessie is an amazing mountain biker and PT based out in Arizona, um, Scottsdale, Prescott,
Prescott. Yeah, you
Prescott.
got it. Close. Prescott.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's right. In the mountains, in the mountains.
You got it. Yeah. So like 2 hours northwest of Scottsdale, basically.
That's right.
So hanging out in the
That's right.
mountains there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that would make sense for the mountain biking for sure.
Yeah.
Um, my geography is terrible. You get me too far out of my little area, and I don't even know.
Listen,
Um,
I've lived like several parts of the country and I have found that geography is so regional. So like in the Midwest, no one really goes outside the Midwest. When I lived in New England, no one knew anything like west of the Mississippi. Now that I live here, no one knows anything east of the Rockies. So like we just hang out in our bubble and that's it. So
for sure. All right. Well, without any further ado, Dr. Jessie and I put together, I got a list of kind of questions from my community and some questions that I had that I wish I would have had the answers to. And we're just going to kind of talk about all of these different topics as it relates to specifically cycling, biking. Maybe we can throw a little bit of triathlon in there as much as possible. But since this is your wheelhouse, I thought we would just kind of get started. So specifically, this conversation is about kind of how scoliosis or spinal fusion could impact things. Because if anyone's been following me for any amount of time, we know that when we have scoliosis, that kind of impacts the whole body. It can impact trunk rotation. It can maybe make us a little uneven in our power distribution, whatever. So I was just wondering, Dr. Jessie, if you have any thoughts on specifically biking mechanics and some things that we may need to keep in mind if we have something like scoliosis or a spinal fusion.
yeah, and scoliosis is a really kind of unique body that is really interesting when it comes to bike fits, right? Because the bike, being on the bike is not like an evolutionarily described position. You know, like running is, cycling not so much. So once we put ourselves on a bike that is something that is uniform bilaterally, it becomes a lot more difficult to feel comfortable if you have something like scoliosis or fusion too. So a lot of times, and then it comes down to a scoliosis too, right? As you know, it's about helping support the curves and honoring the curves while still honoring and helping all the muscles around it to not make the curves more significant or impact you in a way that's disadvantageous. So a couple of big things to look at are basically kind of where your contact points are on the bike. So where your hands hit the bike, how your feet hit in the pedals, and how we can use those contact points to help set you up for success. So when it comes to scoliosis for a lot of people, I will end up using what are called shims in the shoes. I brought visual aids because I'm a big visual aid gal. So when it comes to, and this is for clip in, if you don't clip in, that's fine. But when we have our feet in the pedals, if we have a pelvis that is a little bit maybe different left to right a little bit, what we'll see is that pelvic rotation will also make it look like a longer leg, one side versus the other. That's going to change how those feet communicate in the bike too. So if we have a leg that is quote unquote, I'm going to just say shorter, even though we know it's really a pelvic discrepancy. If we have one leg that is shorter than the other, what we need to do is be able to basically bring that pedal or the pedal up to the shoe itself. So what we can do is we can actually build shims underneath the cleat to help make that communication with the pedal easier. So instead of feeling like this when you're pedaling, we can actually put you into a little bit more even position. So that's one of the biggest things where I usually start with someone that has some sort of leg discrepancy or pelvic discrepancy to make sure the bike feels a little bit more even. And then we kind of build from there a lot of the time.
So interesting. I mean, I know sometimes we use those types of like little heel lifts or things in shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that I had that may be related or may not be related, I know that I've seen for some different types of cyclists, they will actually change kind of where their pedals are, like based on, physics, right? Like one
Uh-huh.
pedal being on a slightly longer lever arm and one pedal being a slightly shorter lever arm. And I don't know if that, like, do you feel like that's too much? I guess it depends on each individual person, but do you feel like that might ever be indicated if someone has like a significant difference?
Right, it can be, and it depends a little bit on some other things too. So when it comes to like when you say a lever arm, the first thing we look at is cleat positioning. So the further we move that cleat out, the longer the lever arm is for when you push down. The one of the biggest indicators as to where we want to put this, well, it's two things typically: numbness and tingling in the feet. The further out you bring the cleat, a lot of times the more pressure it'll put through the toes, which can then cause numbness and tingling in the foot. The other thing with that is the further out you put the cleat, as you're going around that pedal stroke, we want to make sure we're avoiding too much of what's called toe down position. So
Mm.
if that cleat is out too far, what happens is it causes you to do a lot of this action, which then as you start to push down and then try and pull back up, requires more dorsiflexion to get back into this position. So a lot of times ankle mobility is one of the things that impacts where we put the cleat. And two, this will cause you to leak some power if you don't have a little more stable base instead of letting this ankle go through such a big range of motion as you go over and over. So a lot of times less so, necessarily pelvic positioning where we're looking at for cleat positioning, but more power, ankle mobility, and how we need to support the foot to allow for that power to transfer back up. That's why typically, if we do have a leg length discrepancy, this is the few instances in which I will look at shims first before I necessarily look at pedal, cleat positioning, because it's more of a top-down driver as opposed to bottom-up, i.e. when we're looking bottom-up, we're just looking at cleat position. When we're looking top-down, we're looking at what the pelvis is doing and how we support the pelvis and what's going on with the foot.
Amazing. So, first of all, that makes a lot of sense to me because I just recently, during my last triathlon, my bike cleats actually fell apart. Like
Oh
they
no.
disintegrated. So I mentioned that because I got new bike cleats and the cleat itself is much further into the middle of the foot.
Mm,
And so I've been riding on my trainer, but I signed up to do a 13-mile ride for Thanksgiving morning.
I saw that.
And I have got to tell you, it is so much harder because the cleat is so much further back. I really struggled, and the cleat itself is so the shoe like underneath, but the what the cleat is not is so slick. I kept losing,
Mm-hmm.
like I could not clip in. I actually fell off my bike once. It was
Oh
oh my gosh, it was terrible. I was like, I need to practice this more.
no.
All that to say, that makes a lot of sense, especially looking at where your cleat is on your foot. So, for anyone who's listening that's not familiar, like we're talking a little bit about physics, like lever arms. It's all about like creating as much power as you can, right? Like being as efficient as you can with your energy. So when you're doing your pedaling to make sure that we're not losing energy unnecessarily, right? Does that kind of sum it up well?
That's 100%. You got it.
Amazing. So I know, let's say for instance, of course, I am shameless plug. Dr. Jessie does virtual bike fit. So for anyone who does not have an in-person option, Jessie has a whole program for this. So if you are interested in this and you have no idea, I highly recommend looking at her stuff. Of course, I'm going to leave the links to all of her things. Um, however, let's say if it's someone who's noticing like they're feeling lopsided on the bike or they're feeling that one foot is pushing harder, is that kind of your first go-to to look at maybe using a shim or something, or what, how would they kind of figure out what they needed to do?
Great question. And so I think part of this becomes a little bit, I don't want to say in the weeds, but this is where like PT starts to muddy the waters a little bit because, so I was a bike fitter before I went to PT school. And that's actually one of the impetuses behind going to PT school because I'd look at people on their bikes and go, oh, here are the things we can do to change the bike, but there's some stuff we can do to change the body too. And so that is a little bit of a hard, line to delineate sometimes when we're looking at people on the bike. But you're right in that one of the easiest ways to start is to look at what your pedal position looks like or how you feel on the bike. Another good place to start too, however, is saddle position too. So because again, if we talk about more visual aids coming on.
I love it.
Pelvis.
I love it so much.
Big visual aid gal. If you see me in the clinic too, I'm always pulling all this crap out.
Love it so much.
If we look at how the pelvis communicates with the saddle, first of all, it's always a really sensitive area to begin with. Second of all, especially, I need 3 hands for this, especially if we have a pelvis that is, again, a little bit off kilter, it's going to communicate with that saddle in a different way too. So a lot of times if we have a saddle that doesn't feel very good to us, what we'll do is when we're pedaling, we'll end up kind of shifting a lot to feel better on the saddle, but that's also going to look like you're feel like you're not pedaling evenly side to side either. So I will say this is one of the harder things with scoliosis is finding a way to have a saddle fit well that feels good on your pelvis, because it's also one of the hardest things as a cyclist in general, to be honest with you, as far as finding that good saddle. So I got a couple tips about that, but what did you find that was helpful for you?
Well, so I am lucky that I would say that because I have a spinal fusion, they actually, whenever they did the surgery, I think they did a pretty decent job of getting me relatively even.
Good.
And for me, I guess I never really noticed a big difference. However, that
Great.
said, I did actually take my bike to, I got my bike used. It's a relatively nice road bike, but I got it used and one of my PT friends, her husband does bike fit. So
Nice.
I actually did get a bike fit where he got me on the trainer and checked to make sure that I was in the best possible position to make sure that the angles between my pelvis and my knee, like, and everything was in a good alignment. And I have some questions about like the handle, which I know we'll get there soon. But some thoughts on kind of height of our handlebars based on, like, for me with a spinal fusion, I have some limitations certainly that definitely impact my ability to cycle well without anyways, we're getting into the weeds. But I did get a bike fit and I found that to be
Good.
helpful because I know that when I've done training on stationary bikes like at my gym and the setup is not ideal, I definitely feel a difference in the work in my muscles. So I think that
For
might be a
sure.
good tip too, of if you're feeling like there's so much more work either in your quads, like the front of your leg, or if you're feeling, depending on if you're feeling any asymmetry in like where your power is coming from muscle wise and less balanced, I feel like that's probably a sign that maybe it's time to get like a bike fit or someone to look at it, because you should be able to kind of access multiple muscle groups on the bike. Yes. Like you should be able to,
Exactly.
yeah.
You got it. And that's a little bit different too when it comes to triathlon, because when we're talking about triathlon, we also need to make sure we're thinking, yes, we're on the bike, but we still have a run to do after that too.
That is
So
right.
for tri-fits, a lot of times we want to try and ever so slightly decrease the ask through the hamstrings, so the hamstrings are still able to support you on the run a little bit more too. A lot that actually feeds well into your question about bar reach as well, because a lot of times what that means is possibly bringing that saddle just a little bit further forward, which allows the hamstrings to not have to work through quite as big of a range, which can sometimes help them feel just slightly more fresh for the run. The nice thing about that is when we change the reach, so when we bring you closer to the bars, it does help keep you just a little bit more upright too. This is the biggest bone I have to pick with probably cycling in general, whether it's mostly for sure a tri-fit, but for especially just fits in general. Everyone wants to what we call slam the stem, get as low as humanly possible to be nice and arrow, which is good. Being arrow is especially important when it comes to triathlon. However, when we get super low and super arrow, it does a couple different things. It first off cuts down the angle of the hip, so only allows you to get into this position quite so much. If we don't have full hip range of motion, once again, it makes it hard for us to drive through that pedal to generate power. The second thing it does is the further down we get, and I always make my cyclists do this if they're like kind of pushing back on this a little bit, is if I put you into this position and ask you to take a big old breath in, it's a lot harder than if I have you in this position, right? And so I liken it to, we need to be able to take in oxygen to be able to do our sport. And it's really important to that. You can have the most aero car in the world, but if you don't have any gas in it, it's not going anywhere. And so making sure we find a fit that, yes, makes you aerodynamic, but also allows you to recruit the things you need to generate power and oxygenate the system is more important than being as low as possible. Being lower as well oftentimes puts a ton of stress through the neck, and that's where we see a lot of neck pain coming from too, because the lower we get, the more we have to do this to look down the road. So that's exactly what the fun thing really is about bike fitting, is that it's all about finding that balance, right? So we need to make sure that you've got aerodynamics, power, comfort, and the ability to use all those things appropriately. So like I said, that's one of the hills I'll die on, is that everyone's too far into an aero position. It's impacting things further up and down the chain, that is impacting their times more than just being as aero as possible.
100%. I see that a lot when I've done triathlon now for, gosh, since before my son was born. I took a couple of years off, but essentially for the past like 7 years, I have done triathlon most every summer. However, that is something that I've noticed. A lot of people get into this really kind of flexed position. And of course, me as a PT, I'm looking at just how much extension they're getting in their neck. And me with my fusion up to like basically, the beginning of my lungs, like I'm like, that would kill me. Like I would
Yeah.
probably break something
Right.
or really hurt my neck. But that actually kind of segues into, I do think I want to, at this point, go a little bit more into for somebody with a spinal fusion.
Mhm.
Um, so I think you answer this a little bit already, but I know for a lot of people that have a spinal fusion for scoliosis, normally it is going until at least like it's going into the mid thoracic region. So for a lot of people, some people have their fusion up to like T2. So they can
Mhm.
be fused very high. For me, I don't actually have any records, but based on my imaging, it looks like my fusion goes up to about T4. So
Wow.
that's actually
You
most.
high.
I know. Well, so it's like T4 to L2 is the best of my like what I can tell. But it's not every joint or the fusion, it's Harrington rod, so it's like not every joint is fused, but the fusion does go up to that joint. I mention that because for those of us who have so much fusion, for anyone who's listening who's not like really up to date on the movements of the spine, when we don't have scoliosis or when we don't have a spinal fusion, when we're in such a forward position, that motion should be coming from all of our joints. But when you have something like a spinal fusion, where a lot of your, working spinal segments are fused, that part of your spine, it ain't going anywhere. It is stuck. But there's a lot more stress on the segments above. So like those, the neck segments, and then of course at the bottom of the spine too. So that's one of the main questions that I actually got preparing for this is people with spinal fusion, will they see like the traditional cyclist in like an aero position? And we're like, we can't do that.
Yeah. Not happening.
That's not going to happen for us.
Right.
So, I mean, I think you sort of you already talked about this. I know one of the things that I did, I made sure that I get the fork was higher.
Mhm.
Like I had my
Oh,
handlebar sit a
the
little bit
stem.
higher.
Good.
The stem, thank you. See, my bike terms are not great.
That's all right.
I had a taller stem. He actually ordered a stem for me, and then I think he adjusted the saddle a little bit. But I have to be in a more upright position because one of the things that does happen for me is I will start to feel some numbness and tingling in my hands. So,
Mm-hmm.
could you talk a little bit more about if we're feeling that?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, obviously it's multifaceted. There's multiple things that need to be looked at. But if there's one thing we can think about, even from a postural perspective, like something we can change while we're biking that might help with that.
Yeah, so a couple different things. So first thing I always tell my cyclists too is, again, we're going to keep harping this, but that really arrow position really puts you really far down here.
Mhm.
What I always prefer is if I can get my patients to be in a position where you can still ever so slightly hover your hands off, that is most advantageous for you. If you're in a position where if you try and hover your hands, you immediately collapse forward, that's essentially what you're doing on the bike over and over again. You're using way too much energy to hold yourself up. And that core energy, a lot of times it's mostly core, is going to holding you up instead of allowing you to generate power to put that through your legs to actually be able to pedal too. So when it comes to like where we want to be, that's one of the parameters. The other one, like you said, right, is we are influenced by how much we don't have flexion in some of these places, so we're not going to get it. So the biggest thing again comes down to comfort, because the more pain you're in, the less you're going to be able to work hard to generate power, and it's going to impact performance. With the numbness and tingling in the hands, are you in aero bars? I can't remember.
I have just a traditional, like a road bike. So
Okay.
I don't think I have the core strength or the coordination to do like a true aero bar. Um,
Fair enough.
so
I,
I tend to hang on to the horn. So I do tend to hold on a little bit more like narrow than,
mhm.
on the bottom. But I actually heard you did an interview recently where you sort of talked about just that tendency to kind of like dump into your shoulders. And of course that makes sense that
Exactly.
all of these nerves through here are getting compressed.
Exactly. And especially in that arrow position, because it puts us here, what it does is all the nerves that go down our arms start to originate in our neck, and they come right through this area here and then they go down. So the smaller we put this area, the more we're encroaching there. And oftentimes that'll cause numbness and tingling.
Mm.
The other part to that is my train of thought wherever it just went, because I was had about that I was going to say.
I feel
You
like I
said
must
numbness and
mention there
tingling.
is this time difference here. So I'm on the East Coast and you are in Mountain Time. So thank you for being
Correct.
on early.
Oh, no worries. I mean, it's 9:30 here. I should be at least like firing on most cylinders by now, but
Uh,
not always the case. Uh,
it is also
Something else
Monday.
about, yeah, fair enough too. What else the heck was I going to say about that? Well, I'll come back to some other point I had about the numbness and tingling in the hands too. The one thing I will say about aero bars, even though it does put us into a little bit more crunch position, you do have with a lot of the models the ability to stack them differently, right to left. So say you do have a pretty significant still rotation in your thoracic spine, sometimes it can be helpful to stack them differently to help support you a little bit more in that position. So that part's kind of nice. Dang, I really thought it was a good, yeah, go ahead.
Question about that. So when you
Yeah.
say stack, I'm thinking of, well, could you explain more what that means for those of us who aren't as familiar with setup on the bike? Like, do you mean that one arm is like slightly elevated, or like when you say stack, what does that mean?
So actual stack height is just the height between your bike and how far the stem up goes, basically. So if I can pull out through here,
There
this
she
right
is.
here, this is stack height right through here, what this
Got
is.
it.
So when we talk about triathlon, because we have the bars, the aero bars that are here, we're talking about actually stacking underneath the bars here to elevate those. What your guy did is exactly what we look at a lot of people is he changed the stem out and made that higher, which
Hmm.
also increases your ability to come up a little bit higher too. So that becomes very important, that higher stem, especially because most bikes don't come with a super high stem. So that's a really easy change to make for a lot of people to help support you if you do feel like you're too far over or too bent over in that position. So looking at stem angle is really important. Stems come at different angles, so you can get whatever angle you need to support you. And they also come in different lengths too. So if you feel like you're too stretched out, you can get a shorter stem to once again bring that reach closer to you, which he might have done a lot of times. If we bring a stem up, we may also decrease the length of it too, to again bring that reach closer to you.
So interesting. It's like biomechanics. It's like physics. So it's like
Sure
angles.
is.
It's like we're back in college physics. My least
It's
favorite place to
exactly
be.
right. Yeah. Physics was one of the things that I really, really liked, but was really, really terrible at, which maybe I shouldn't admit. But
Well, I mean, you're
now, like
clearly
looking at it,
doing just fine
I
now.
was gonna say, yeah, maybe just needing better context for me. Like, rolling a bowling ball down a hill and then figuring out like whatever else maybe wasn't as helpful. But like when we look at it in the terms of how we're gonna be on the bike, you're right, that does make a lot more sense to me. So that helps. So
Uh,
um I forgot again. I'm still trying to think of my numbness and tingling comment, but we'll
It's
keep
okay. Well,
rocking and rolling. I'll think of it.
I was actually going to say, aside from, yeah, the physics problems, I remember like you're weighing a fish in an elevator going up. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Who does this? Like, what are we talking about right now? Like,
Right?
stop.
Finding it, yeah, the friction coefficient as a,
Like,
something
no,
glides past something else. And yeah, it's all.
it's crazy. No, but but speaking about the numbness and tingling, I will say that for a lot of people with scoliosis, but particularly spinal fusion, there tends to be a lot of anxiety around when certain bodily sensations, especially
Mhm.
depending on the experience you had after your surgery. So some doctors don't do a great job of empowering their patients to get active, and they tend to be overly, I don't want to say fear mongering, but they tend to tell their people to be so cautious. But then
Right.
when they feel something like a numbness or tingling that is just an issue that could be fixed, some people they freak out and they're like, oh, this means I shouldn't be doing this. I should not be training. I should not be on the bike, whatever. So I think it's really helpful for people to hear. I hope it's helpful. I mean, it's helpful for me just to hear that, first of all, everyone can experience this. It's not like specific to our
Totally.
specific, condition. But also that, you may be experiencing this and it may just be a simple change of your bike, like something on your bike, the position of your
Mhm.
saddle or the position of your handlebars. Or you may just need to kind of work on strengthening your core so you're not like dumped down into your thoracic outlet and,
Mhm.
closing down all the nerves on the front of your leg, on the front of your arm.
You got it.
So
I
I
remember the
hope that
thing I
that's
was going to
helpful.
say.
You
Yeah.
found it.
And yeah, and a couple points to that because it's about the serratus. So remind me to tell you that. But the other thing I was going to say is prior also to going to PT school, I was a surgical tech. So I've done spinal fusions. So I will tell you this, those rods and those screws they're putting in you, they are robust as hell. So they're not going anywhere. They have really been used to help support you in a position where you can then use that spine. Like you talk about this, right? Like your bionic spine, like you can use the crap out of that thing now. And I do know surgeons want to protect their surgical sites and their surgeries. But I will tell you, you just got so much more stability in a spine that just kind of needed it that you're really going to be in a good position to be able to put some power through it. So you're right. I always spend a lot of time talking to patients too about how, yes, I know you were told, be careful. Don't, I've had people with scoliosis told, don't ever load your spine, don't ever put a barbell on you, blah, 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 blah. But really,
That
you've
is
been
the hill
set
I will
up
die on.
right? And so you have been set up for so much more advantages in a lot of cases that you're really ready to rock and roll. And so I always like to try and remind people of that as well too. Side point, most of those too are anodized in really fun colors. So you typically also have some really cool colors in you as well. So I was like,
Oh,
usually
I
it's kind of cool
wish.
purple and some green and some orange. I've seen them all. It's really kind of fun to be like, oh, now you're a little more multicolored too. So anyways, that's why I always like to make sure that I make that point too to people because it is really easy for surgeons to tell people what not to do when really they should be saying, hey, look at all the cool things and you could do them before, right? But you just got some more power behind that punch basically. So I think it's a good point to make. And I know you do a really good job of educating people about that too.
Yeah, I think that's really important for people to hear though, because I think there's also, when you've gone through something like that, I do think that depending on your circumstances before or when you got fused, we carry things into that experience. And
For
so
sure.
I think the more empowering language we can use for ourselves, and then also just listening to empowering stuff from experts like yourself, I think it's really important to remember that we're not fragile, our spines aren't fragile, and I think that that's what we have to remember, that,
You got it.
stronger than we think we
Exactly.
are.
Exactly, 100%. So, and the last point I was going to make about that, better again, visual aids are important, but not if you have a bulky sweater on. The other thing I was going to say about the what we can do on the bike to help support ourselves. Yes, we talked about the core. The muscle that we oftentimes don't think about that is part of the core is a muscle called our serratus anterior. So that muscle. Oops, sorry. If you got a hot second for one more visual aid, let's see if I can pull up. I use Essential Anatomy a lot with all my patients too. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've ever used that program, but I'm not as familiar with
I'm in the
Zooms.
market for a new one. Do you want to
Oh,
share,
I
the
do.
screen?
I would love to share the screen. Oh yeah, you have to let me
Let's
do
see
it
if I
before.
can.
I promise I won't share anything inappropriate.
Here. Okay, I think I did it.
Let's see. Yep, you got it.
Great.
So let's do this. All right, you see your body?
Yes.
Cool. So the muscle called our serratus anterior is this sucker right through here. So everyone talks about it as a shoulder muscle. Yes, it is a shoulder muscle. It connects up and underneath the shoulder. It helps us bring our shoulder up overhead. It's also the muscle when you see a boxer punch, that feathery muscle right through here. It wraps all the way around onto the rib cage. So it actually becomes a really important both rib cage stabilizer and mover. So because it has those fibers that wrap around onto the rib cage, what it does in the bike position is it helps us stabilize in this position. When this muscle gets tired, this is when we start to see that kind of sinking down and doing some of this action and just holding on to the handlebars for dear life. So the stronger you can get that serratus, the more it actually helps you put in a position where you can support the entire trunk too. So it's like I said, it's kind of a forgotten muscle when it comes to what we need to do to support ourselves on the bike. But it's one that I oftentimes train with almost all my cyclists.
So
you sound like you got an idea.
Well, I have a question because I know some things that I normally do, but what would be, and I know you have a whole strength program for cyclists that you offer, but just to give people a little sneak peek, what would be one actionable like exercise people can do to work on their serratus that they could start like today, that they could start working on their stability on the bike?
You got it. There's an exercise called a serratus push-up that I think I have a link on my YouTube actually. And it actually is nice because it's in a push-up position, which means it does make you use your trunk too and some of your abdominal muscles. But it also allows you to use abdominal muscles with getting that serratus muscle to do the work. So that's a really great exercise to start with to start to coordinate everything together.
I'll make sure that I link that in the YouTube description so that people can see it because I think as you know, YouTube can be a little bit of a scary place. Like you go to search for something and you kind of never know who's actually behind the video and whether they're trustworthy or not. So people can look up serratus push-ups and it can be like your Joe Schmo with no training who's like, this is how you do it. And as a professional, you're like, that's actually not how you do it at all.
Exactly, right? You're like, ooh, so far off.
Oh, no,
I'm trying to pull up. I'm pulling up the exercise right now. Oh, and the exercise I actually have on my YouTube is actually a serratus push-up to down dog. So it helps you get your arms up both here and then overhead to really get that serratus work through the entire range. So I'll actually drop it here just in the front of your notes too that we're sharing so that you've got
it. That brings up another question of mine, but go ahead.
Do it. No, that's all I had.
Well, so a lot of issues that we have when we have a thoracic curve, depending on what it is. So for anyone who's listening, I know our language is getting a little bit technical, but so if you have a curve in your upper back or your rib cage, most people who have scoliosis will typically have a right thoracic curve, which means that the right side of the back is what's curved out and sticks out more. But what that occasionally does, it actually changes because the ribs are like in literally a different position. Where someone's shoulder actually sits is actually different on one side than the other. So for me, even though I have a spinal fusion, because I have so much rib asymmetry that happens because my ribs are so like asymmetrical, like one side sits out so much more, my right shoulder actually sits more forward. And even when I do a good job of stretching my pec, I have a difference in where my shoulders actually sit because of that. So the reason I mention that is because for some people, especially with bigger curves, or like we are more prone to more difficulty getting overhead on one side than the other. So with that in mind, knowing that we may have a structural difference, is there something that you would recommend or some, like a screen to make sure we have the range of motion, or like, is there something that comes to mind for you?
Great. Yeah. So typically when I start some of the bike fit, I do test kind of range of motion and what positions they can get in off the bike because that does dictate what we can do on the bike. So I do measure, dorsiflexion like we talked about, so ankle range of motion. And same thing. Luckily, we don't have to hang out on the bike here. But similarly, if we do talk about aero positioning, the more aero we get, the further out typically we have to start to be shoulders here too, and depending on where we're here. We do typically want to have a really gentle, this angle right here should be somewhere around 70 to 90 degrees or so. So we don't ever want to be here, but we do need the ability of the shoulders to be able to protract, retract, and at least come a little bit into flexion too. So I am typically testing that. I'll even do a lat test too, because the lat connects from here all the way down here. If it is tight, it also has implications to what the back can do and what what the shoulder can do. So I do run people through a range of motion testing. I will even look at trunk rotation too, especially when we talk about, triathlon. We need trunk rotation for running and swimming. So if we can at least make sure we're supporting trunk rotation on the bike to allow it to get as much as it can with running and swimming, then we can also be in a better position for that too. So I think I said before, so I got into bikes to do triathlon. So I did triathlon all through high school and college. So I do understand kind of the importance of making sure we've got energy for the swim, energy for the bike, energy for the run, and how all those things compete or work together.
Yes. Well, you mentioned the trunk rotation, and that's actually for those of us who have, fusion through the thoracic spine, that's a lot of our trunk rotation. And actually, so of course, our bodies do a beautiful job of finding rotation in other places. But I am thinking of my friends who I do have some online clients and some patients who actually are fused into the pelvis, which means that is obviously, going to impact how their body can move. You kind of hope that they have a lot of range of motion in their hips because obviously if they're fused from neck to pelvis, there's not going to be a lot of rotation that they can get. So I think and I don't know if there's an answer there, but I do know that there are some limitations that we can have. Luckily for me, I am only fused to my L2, so that means that I do have some segments in my lower spine that I can rotate through. And of course, the unfused segments, they do my rotation as well. But, I think that there's I see a lot of the drills that you do for rotation on your Instagram. I'm like, oh, that looks like that feels so good.
Yeah, won't be happening. Yeah. And I will tell you the one thing when we go back to, we talked about this a little bit too, right, if people are fused into their pelvis, the thing I always look at too is really making sure we're supporting hamstrings and quads then, because what I see, you probably see this too, is when someone has a fusion into the pelvis, it sends a signal to the quads and the hamstring that says, hey, we're not moving anymore either. You guys had better stiffen up too.
Yep.
So
that's right.
A lot of times I work on the bike fit and off the bike, honestly, to make sure hamstrings and quads are in both a good position and also can get both into a lengthened and a contracted position, because then they end up being kind of static. And especially because we do need the hamstrings that connect to the pelvis to be loose enough to allow for whatever we can get here. It's really important to make sure those hamstrings are both strong and able to lengthen too. So a lot of times I'm looking at that both on and off the bike.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that is really important because it is, I think, important to do the strength, which I know you have an amazing strength program, but also equally important, especially for those of us who might have some hardware, to make sure that we are focusing on range of motion, flexibility as well, because that trunk is stiff, that's going to potentially create stiffness in other areas. So I think that that's a really good point. Amazing. Wow, this has been so mind-blowing. I'm looking at my question sheet. We've actually talked about a lot of it already.
Cool.
I think one of the questions that I have that we haven't specifically talked about, I have a couple questions on just stability and kind of exercise, which I know we'll kind of just briefly go into that. But my last question on kind of when I'm looking at biomechanics and how and the bike, are there specific types of, if you're looking at someone's bike fit, and people, obviously, we have compensations. We have some movement strategies that may not be, as efficient as they can be. I know that in the scoliosis world, we talk about, and probably with everyone, you can't always avoid compensations. But when we're looking at an endurance sport like longer distance cycling or like triathlon, one of the things that I worry about is injury, right? So is there any type of compensation or something that you're looking at when you're working with someone that tells them that maybe we need to make an adjustment? Are there any red flags, I suppose, that people should be looking out for?
Oh, good question. I think the biggest ones are, and this is why my bike fits are typically around 2 hours, and why, especially on my virtual bike fits, I'll have people ride for a little bit before they start taking videos, because we do want to see what happens as the system fatigues over time. So for us, and I will say this, again, cycling is not an evolutionary advantaged position. And so inevitably, if you are training for longer distances, you might have some discomfort. You might have some stiffness. You may not feel like 1,000,000,000% the entire time. What we do want to see is when any of these sensations start to impact function or start to impact you past kind of what I call like the normal amount. My normal is not a great way to say it, but if you get off the bike and you're a little stiff for, a half an hour afterwards, okay. If we see those symptoms persist for like 24 to 48 hours, then we know, okay, we have to look at some things on the bike. The biggest things being some of the stuff we talked about actually. So, where your reach is and how much your neck has to extend to get there. One of the things we haven't talked too much about, which you mentioned when your guy looked at, which is important, is knee over pedal too. So especially if you're having knee pain, should be relatively speaking, when your knee is at 90 degrees, that's a terrible way to look at this. We want your knee to be relatively over this pedal spindle, basically right through here. So if it's too far forward or too far back, it typically or can cause knee pain. It can also go back to putting too much weight through the quad or the hamstring. So looking at where your knee is over your pedal spindle is also a really important thing to look at. Last thing is to look at your knee angle when you're at the bottom of your pedal stroke. We want somewhere around 150-ish degrees of that angle when your knee is at the bottom of your pedal stroke. Too little, and once again, it's going to put a little too much stress through the quad and through the knee. Too much, and it'll put too much stress through the hamstring. So those are kind of typically the three parameters I look at. There's a couple other things with kind of reach you can look at too. Speaking of, I have a real quick bike fit guide on my website. That's just a free downloadable that actually goes over a lot of these things. So if you go to my website, chainreactionpt.com, pretty positive it's right at the top. I think Lex put it right at the top for me, so you can just click on it and it just gives you a downloadable PDF for it too. But it goes over a lot of those kind of really quick and dirty things to look at to make sure you really set yourself up for a good fit on the bike. And then I do think back to your point too, especially with scoliosis or someone that's training a lot for something, a bike fit's a really important part to that too. You can screen it yourself a lot of times. And sometimes, honestly, you screen it yourself, you look at some of those points I have, it can be enough. But if you're still experiencing some symptoms after that, having professional eyes on you is really, really important for something where you're on the bike for, hours a week. So it's something that's important to make sure you're positioned in a position that's going to be most advantageous for you.
Yeah, I think that's actually for anyone. There's this group that I'm a part of on Facebook, although I'm not really on Facebook much anymore, but it's called the Pathetic Triathletes group. And it's basically a bunch of triathletes just like me with senses of humor, like a dry sense of humor that just like poke fun at themselves all the time. But I mention that because I'm a little bit, I have a little bit of an eyeball into the world of triathlon. And it can get just like any hobby, like it can get very expensive. But when I think about, I will always be, I happened to win first in my age group, just completely I was not expecting it. I'm usually solidly middle of the pack. So I never plan on being, I never plan on being really first, really a strong competitor. However, people can drop a lot of money on, their bike and on their equipment. But when I think about, especially as it relates to how your bike is working for you, a bike fit, I feel like is such an important piece because you could have the most expensive, the nicest bike in the world, but if it's not set up for you, it's not really, you're not going to get the benefit of it because you can't create the power that you need. You can't push your boundaries because it's not set up for you. So I would argue that the bike fit is actually a crucial part because especially if you're trying to do any type of distance.
For sure, yeah.
Those little inefficiencies, they add up, right?
They add up, exactly. So, and I will say this too, you can talk about how if you don't have a bike fit or your bike doesn't feel very good for you, you might end up doing something like, okay, feeling like you have to get in for a couple more massages or feel like you have to start buying a whole bunch of mobility tools, whatever it is. For the cost of a couple of massages, you can get a good bike fit. I'm a little biased here, but I will say also if you can find someone that's a bike fitter that is like a health professional, so oftentimes there are all our PTs that do bike fits. I do tend to prefer to go that way because people that do bike fit through bike shops, sometimes they are also trying to make sure they can get some different stuff on your bike for you, right? So they can start to tack on some labor costs and some money by selling you different stuff. A lot of them aren't like that. I know a lot of great bike fitters and bike shops, but I do think also just having the lens of a little bit more body mechanics and medical health lens can be helpful to give you just a little bit better all over kind of holistic bike fit. Like what I do, since I don't work I used to work at a bike shop at the bike fitter. But since I don't have obviously inventory, I have a relationship with a local bike shop in which I can get people 10% off on all parts that I do recommend. And I write them a little prescription pad of like things that I think they need to do or change out if there is anything. But my goal is always to try and make sure we are getting you whatever you can with the stuff you have, and then finding how we can best accommodate you with if we do have to make recommendations. And it's kind of like PT, right? Like I make my best recommendations of, hey, this is what I think you should do, and here, and you have this information now to do what you want with it. It's your body, it's your bike, it's whatever you want to do with it after that. But I'm at least going to set you up for as much success as I can.
Amazing. My goodness, this has been so amazing. Can I ask you just a couple of questions
Heck
about
yeah.
the breathing? So one of the things
Yeah.
that I talk
Oh God,
about,
I'm a big breather.
I know, well, and I know I love the model that you have, the really flexible rib model. I
I
can't,
should have
it's
brought it to my
okay.
clinic.
Gosh, I want one so badly. And I currently, I don't talk about it enough that I feel like I can justify spending the money, but one day it's on my list. Um, One of the things I talk about, the reason I bring it up, for a lot of us with scoliosis and also, spinal fusion, our ability, because of that rotation and that torque within the rib cage, we
Right.
sometimes cannot, even with scoliosis, even with a mild scoliosis, our ability to get good mobility through the thoracic spine and through the rib cage is actually limited. So
You
one
got
of
it.
the things that I have learned as far as being an athlete with spinal fusion, where I have some structural limitations and I have some stiffness in my ribs, but we can't necessarily work on getting more rotation. But what we can do is we can use our breathing to kind of correct for some of that. So I guess I will preface the question itself by saying one of the things that I teach people to do for their scoliosis or for their spinal fusion is you can actually selectively focus on expanding into those areas where someone is compressed. So if you
Mm-hmm.
have like a curve on the right side of your spine, then we can try to use your breath to really expand into that right front rib cage. And the more we kind of train our diaphragm and our breathing muscles, that can act like a stabilizer, and it can act like a mobility exercise for the ribs.
Exactly.
So that all to ask is there anything, so let's say it's somebody who has a significant scoliosis or a spinal fusion that can't necessarily get that rotation, um on top of just like obviously maybe some soft tissue stuff and working on the breathing, is there anything else that you can think of that we may focus on to try to optimize, our mobility or our stability on the bike? Like anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I really like your point too about right. We might not have access to some of those motions, but we do know in the spine we have what's called spinal accessory motion, right? So even if the spine is trying to rotate, when it rotates, it does have. Really wish I had all my. I should have done this in the clinic. I got a bunch of models there too.
But then
When
you
the
wouldn't have
spine
had the
is trying, I
bike.
know, right? So uh, when we're trying to rotate a vertebral segment, we are also getting side bending in that as well. So even if we can't rotate, what we can do is we can work on side bending. So even really simple up and over side bend rotation, it at least sets the stage for the joint to be able to move as well as possible, even if it can't get true rotation into that movement. Same thing with breathing, right? We have the ribs that attach to the thoracic spine. So the better the ribs or the umbilical joint can actually move, the better it opens up the space for the vertebra itself to move as much as possible. So I really like your breathing into the certain space. I use that a lot with people too. I usually just use kind of like what you do, right? Like breathe into my hand, try and breathe into this part of my hand, wherever it might be. You can also focus on that on the bike too. Funnily enough, sometimes I'll use, if people are wearing a pack, I'll use that as like their tactile cue. Like, hey, when you have your pack on, breathe into that side of your pack. So you can actually start to learn how to breathe in that position. I'll also have people do that sitting in the car. So they're seated, they can sink into that same position, and then they could translate it on the bike too. So quite honestly, your cues of like segmental breathing are things I use a lot of too. Sorry, my alarms are going off now too. So that's one of the big ones. The serratus stuff I told you, because that attaches to the ribs, that is one way to also get rib motion. Whenever we get rib motion, we get thoracic motion. So a lot of times I focus on where we can get motion, and capitalize. I was going to use the word exploit. That's not it. Capitalize upon that movement to be able to get it wherever else, or to be able to support where we might not be able to get it. So as far as some other stuff, I think those are we honestly covered, I think, like the big things, the breathing, the serratus. I think those are the really good places to start. I will say the last thing actually of this, and you might see this too, is when we talk about the core, the biggest thing I see with my athletes is not necessarily that they necessarily need a stronger core, not to mention we could all work on it, but a lot of times, same thing with the hamstrings, we need a lengthened core, especially when we go back to that rotation with the swimming, especially. We need our core to be able to work in this lengthened position. If I'm swimming here right now, same thing with running too. A lot of times, especially if we have protective tone from, say, a surgery or something else, we're really good at holding it and using it in this position. We're not so good at holding it in all the other positions. And what this does is this teaches us how to support a spine only in compression when we need it in as much extension, flexion, rotation, side bending that we can get it in. So I do end up working a lot on lengthening. So things like dead bugs is a great example of an exercise to use for that, and making sure we're working throughout the entire range of the obliques and the core.
Amazing. Yeah, I noticed in myself, just as a little personal anecdote, so hopefully people can make sense of it. So I've had two kids. I ended up having C-section with my first one, and then subsequently I just decided for C-section with my second one. And that is something that I'm still having to retrain almost, so 5 years later, is allowing that lengthening in, because I have the fusion, right? I've had the fusion for a long time, but also retraining core stability with that lengthening, because that's just something that I didn't do for a while. So now I have to, I'm working with a trainer to work on that. But I think that it is important. We talk about that with the pelvic floor a lot. We need to be able to access strength throughout a larger range of motion. And whenever we
Totally.
don't have enough range, we're going to see issues. So that might, in the core, that might look like stiffness. That might look like, like inability to control certain motions. That may look like just kind of an overall tension in the system. But I think that that's a really excellent point. And I think that hopefully people are walking away with, after listening to this, that it is important to be strong, but it's also important to be flexible and strong at the same time.
Exactly. Yep. And what I always tell people is tightness is a symptom, not a cause. So we are
That's
tight
right.
because something else isn't working appropriately. And so a lot of times when we strengthen, we then allow the system to relax. And so then we start to get that flexibility back too.
Amazing. So I think with that, my final question, it kind of leads into, because I know you have a whole program, a whole strength program for cyclists, which I've actually recommended to a lot of my cyclist
Thank you.
clients and patients that I see, because I think it's amazing, actually. But so when we're thinking about just cross training, obviously you and I are both fans of like just like typical strength training, typical resistance training. So obviously, my first recommendation would be to, get them to look into your guide and to invest in that. But if someone is feeling overwhelmed and they want to find one exercise that can get them started as they start to make all these changes. Hopefully they're saving up for a bike fit. Hopefully, they're working on some of these things that we're talking about. But what would be, from a cross training perspective, for the biggest bang for your buck, what one exercise do you feel like would be the most beneficial or the most advantageous for someone as they're starting out?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to hate to say this because one of my least favorite exercises, which is how we know it's effective, and
I
it's
feel that.
the side lunge. So when it comes to cycling, especially, and the reason I created this strength training guide, which is like a 12-week self-paced guide, basically, is because a lot of cyclists don't know what to do. The guide is to really it's made to support muscles and strengthen muscles that you need on and off the bike to make you a well-rounded athlete and help you drive power on the bike. The side lunge is a great exercise because, one, it makes us do lateral side to side movement, which we don't get on the bike. That requires hips and obliques to have to work a little bit harder than they would, again, off the bike. It also requires unilateral movement. So your right leg's doing something different than your left, just like it's doing when it's running, swimming, riding, all the stuff. I typically have people hold a weight at chest height because then you're loading the spine itself too. So then we're actually getting loads through the multifidi, through some of the paraspinals to really make everyone work together and to help you generate force from the back I shouldn't say from the back, to help the back generate force through the legs and make everyone coordinate like they need to.
Mm-hmm.
So the side lunge is a really good one, which is why I hate it the most, because I just think it's hard. So
I feel
but
that.
it's a great one.
I feel that. Amazing. I mean, I knew this conversation was going to be awesome, and yet I am leaving with my mind completely blown. And I have so much to think about. And goodness, as we start to wrap up, is there anything that you feel like we haven't talked about, or do you have any last advice for maybe an athlete or a wannabe athlete who is maybe a little nervous or, needs a little encouragement? What would you say?
Yeah, I think, especially in the world of cycling, I think it is a little bit of a hard barrier to entry. I think it can be intimidating at first, for sure. So a lot of times people they'll be like, I don't want to go on a group ride. I'm not so sure. I'm a little nervous about it. What if I get dropped? And I will tell you, after I've ridden for, oh boy, I guess it's 20 years now.
I know we're the same age. It
Yes.
starts to feel a little bit overwhelming. Like, has it been that long?
I know, right? So, but I will tell you, we all get intimidated on the bike, myself included. I raced competitively for years, and I still sometimes go on rides. I'm like, oh God, what if I'm the slowest one? And you know what? It never, ever, ever matters. Everyone's psyched to have you out there. The bike is, and honestly, sport in general is one of the best ways to make lasting connections with people. I met my husband through riding. I've met most of my best friends through riding that I've still had for these 20 years. I just went and rode with a buddy down in Tucson who I know from college from riding. And so it's one of the best ways, again, to just get with people that are like-minded and to feed your soul in a way that's just, better than a lot of ways I've found, to be honest with you. And what I always tell people is, you are an athlete. Everyone who has a body is an athlete. You don't have to be running marathons. You don't have to be doing, Olympic tries. But if you are moving in a way with intention, then you're an athlete. And quite honestly, we're just psyched to have you out there. So just get out there and do your thing. No one is judging you as much as you think they are. And again, I have to tell myself that sometimes after 20 years of this. We're just psyched to have you out there. And I'm just so psyched that, you found that there are a lot of people with scoliosis who probably have been cautioned about, you got to be fragile, blah, 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 all the other bull crap we hear, that are out there on bikes riding and being like, hey, I'm doing this try. I need some more information too. So they're doing the thing despite not even possibly having as good a setup as they could. And they're still doing the thing, right? They're still doing it without the information. They're still doing it because there isn't enough information out there, and they're still getting out there. And I just think that is the raddest thing ever.
Awesome. I am just so pleased that you took the time, and it has been so amazing. So I'm going to drop all of your links in
Thank
the
you.
video, but remind us again. So chainreactionpt.com
Yep.
and
Chain reaction. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Okay, chainreactionpt.com. I'm also Chain Reaction PT on Instagram. I put a lot of info out on both places. My blog on chainreactionpt.com's got a ton of bike fit information. As I mentioned, I've got that free downloadable bike fit guide, my Strength Revolutions online. I actually have I'm gonna have to find you that link too. There is a way to get the first week free of that revolution, so you can find out what it is. I put it up when I was doing a wait list for it, so I gotta find it again. I'll be happy to throw that out there too. I do a virtual bike fit as well. I do offer, we haven't talked about this much, but I do offer clinician consultations too. So clinicians that are working with athletes or want to start their own practice, because I own my own practice here in Prescott. I've been getting a lot of questions about that too. So I opened up my schedule to allow for people to be able to do consults with me from a clinician standpoint as well. So I think those are the big things with all the resources, information. As you've noticed, I just really like talking about PT, bikes, bike fits. So I'm really just trying to get as much information out there for people as possible. So I think that's both my Instagram and my website are a really great place to start if you're looking for more info.
I mean, also, I would recommend, even if you're not necessarily a cyclist, she also puts out great 20-minute workouts all the time that you don't have to
I
be a
do.
cyclist to do and are quite effective. So,
You do not. Yeah, exactly. I'm all, again, it's all about the strength training. And as a cyclist myself, because you're probably recommending this to your cyclists because they all hate strength training, as like myself as well. But I just understand the benefits of it so much. It outweighs the fact that I don't love doing it. So if you can get in for 20 minutes in the gym, awesome. That's all you need. Sure, would we like to see you for 35, 40? Maybe. But if you only have 20 minutes, let's get you doing 20 minutes of work. So, like I said, I have a lot of information. I like to think I'm also very funny online, not entirely the case. But if you're looking for a couple giggles, you may get a couple on the Instagram too.
Well, Dr. Jessie, thank you so much for taking the time. And this has been so informative. So thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks, Dr. Laura. Thanks for having me on. This has been so much fun.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Everybody go look up Dr. Jessie. She's amazing.
Thanks, Dr. Laura.
Bye.